The hinges screamed against the roaring storm as he pushed open the stable door. A huge body writhed in the wet straw with shoulders as wide as 2 boards of wood. There were bruised lash marks all over her back. Elias immediately tightened his hold on the lantern when she looked up and saw the golden eyes of an Apache warrior. Despite her weariness, she was at least 7 feet tall, more than 2 meters and 10 centimeters powerful, and her muscles were rippling. "Remain back." The bitter cold and short breaths ruined her voice. Elias did not retreat, but he also did not get his rifle. He could see the ripped wounds in her wrists, the snapped bonds, and the silent flame of desperation in her eyes. "You are on my land," Elias replied quietly. "I do not want trouble." "Are you hungry?" Like a pursued animal, her eyes were cautious as she cocked her head. No response. After setting a bowl of food on the wooden floor, Elias took a step back. "Eat if you want to." After a considerable amount of time, the Apache woman crawled forward, picking at the food with her hands while trembling. She murmured so softly as Elias turned away. It was barely audible. You will not hand me over to them," was Elias' succinct but firm response. "I don't sell people." The snowfall continued. The wind battered the cabin walls night after night, seemingly attempting to rip apart the precarious refuge of 2 people. After tending to the Apache woman's injuries, Elias made the decision to let her remain in the cabin, not because he trusted her, but rather because he knew that if she spent one more night in the stable, she would freeze to death. When Elias inquired, lay near the door, where the draft was coldest, her hand always gripping the small knife he had given her during first aid. She referred to herself as Nana. Elias didn't protest. Before trusting people, anyone who had lived to adulthood in the West had learned to trust their instincts. The water trough outside had been buried by the deep snow by the 3rd morning. The cabin had become a wooden box imprisoned in a sea of white. "Why are you not afraid of me?" Nia questioned abruptly while Elias was tending to the fire. Elias only shrugged and said, "You are big, strong. But the cold is scarier than you." Na looked at him, perplexed by that. She had never encountered someone who could converse with an Apache warrior with such ease. Later that day, Elias remarked half-jokingly as he was piling firewood in the corner, "If this winter keeps us confined much longer, persons in town will start saying, 'I aim to start a big family before spring.'" Na turned to face him, and the corner of her mouth lifted into a cold, arrogant smile that could only come from an Apache woman who had never bowed to anyone. "Every word, like the edge of a blade. I would sleep with you," she declared, "and she would have children with a regular man." Elias chuckled. "Not at all offended. Hearing you say it aloud. It does sound reckless, I must say." Na scoffed. However, when she looked away, her eyes sparkled with something more akin to amazement at the man's composure than contempt. The snow fell much more heavily that night in the Wild West love story. The wind made lengthy, beast-like roars as it howled around the cottage. Elias covered Na with a large blanket and placed more firewood to the stove. He warned against moving too much or the wounds would tear. For the first time, Nana saw him through the wavering light of the fire. Not with the eyes of a person prepared to kill anyone who dared to approach. "Why are you doing this?" she inquired in a somewhat softer voice. Elias gave a straightforward response without pausing. "Don't allow anyone to pass away in my home. That's all." The storm continued to rage over the snow-covered mountains outside. Even while neither would acknowledge it, the gap between them started to close inside the little, claustrophobic cabin. Every night was the same since Nana had moved into the cabin. Her breathing was erratic, heavy at times, broken at others, and she would suddenly spring awake as though she was about to take down an invisible adversary. Elias observed, but he didn't inquire. He didn't want to open a wound that she was still attempting to keep quiet about. Elias was sharpening a sword by the fire one evening after the storm had subsided a bit. The flames created shadows on his sun-weary face. Na was the first to speak after a long period of stillness. With her eyes fixed on the distant, she remarked, "I was not born to hide in a little house like this. I am an Atsa lineage warrior. I have been trained to ride, hunt, battle, and never bow to anyone since I was a young child." Elias put down the sword. "However, this is your first time running." She didn't react angrily. Nana let out a long, heavy breath that felt like the weight of a whole mountain range from the Wild West Stories podcast. They tied me up, sold me across 3 towns, and ambushed me while I was by myself. The eyes of those dirty men. I'd rather perish in the snow than return to their grasp. Elias remained silent. Na lightly caressed one of her shoulder's lash marks. I retaliated, killing 1 and wounding 2, but there were too many. The knife handle broke in my hand when they beat me. Elias went to the wooden cabinet, took out a bottle of herbal remedy, and gave it to her. She seems taken aback. With a voice as firm and quiet as the oak tree by the front entrance, Elias said, "You are not going to ask anything else. You are not weakened by what happened. It just demonstrates to me your true strength." Nana hesitated. Elias saw a peek of the side of her that she always kept buried as her normally icy features briefly melted. Later, as Elias went back to the fireplace, Nana spoke once more, her voice barely audible above the flames. "I've never been handled as you are. Nobody has ever allowed me to stay at their house without expecting something in return." Elias didn't look back. "You are breathing," he replied simply. "You must have a place to sleep. For me, that is sufficient justification." For a considerable amount of time, Nana gazed at him with an expression that was no longer tinged with distrust but rather with something else that she was unwilling to identify. The snowy night outside started to soften. However, a different kind of storm had started to alter its path inside Nia's heart. Even though the sun had not yet started to set that afternoon, the sky abruptly grew darker. The sound of horse hooves echoed through the snow while Elias was cutting wood behind the cabin. Impatient and malicious. He narrowed his eyes at the narrow white road as if they already knew exactly where they were headed. 2 men on horseback were riding directly towards the cabin. Elias recognized them right away. Those with hardened faces were the ones that hunted down indigenous people to sell like cattle. One of them grinned icily, and the smell of cheap beer filled his speech. "Hawkins, good evening. I've heard that you have some rather big cargo." Without flinching, Elias stood erect. "You guys ought to turn around and return to your starting point." The other one tapped his boot against the cabin door while looking around. "We own that Apache girl. Do you think you can keep her hidden? For this kind of thing, we have good noses." With his voice as flat and icy as forged steel, Elias crossed his arms. "She is not a part of anyone." There was a bark of laughter from the bearded one. "It's easy out here in the West, Hawkins. The person who catches wins. You owe us since you're holding." Elias gazed at them without blinking. The handgun holstered at his hip was visible as he moved his coat to the side. His voice became quieter, each syllable cutting through the atmosphere like an axe cutting through wood. "You should bring documents that have been signed by a judge and a priest when you return." He gave the last line like a blow to the gut after pausing for half a beat. "And even in such case, you might still be shot by Wild West love tales." The 2 men paused. They saw Elias's assurance as genuine. It was true. The serenity of a man who had buried many evil persons in this valley. After exchanging glances, they withdrew their reins and retreated. The final one threw a cautionary tale over his shoulder. "Hawkins, you haven't seen this through to the finish." The cabin door creaked open as the hoofbeats faded into the distance. With her deep black eyes still shaking from the dread she had struggled to control, Nana stood there with half of her body creating a shadow on the hardwood floor. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a decision that would last a lifetime. "I'll stay if you did it for me." Elias gave her a blank stare. However, his steady nod conveyed more information than any words could. Another fire had just started to burn in a location that was cooler than the snow-covered mountains. "I sincerely appreciate your presence. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel if this tale reminded you of red dust afternoons and the sound of horse hooves in your chest. That way, we can sit together every day and I'll share another Western tale with you." The snowstorm returned that night and was more intense than it had ever been. The snow outside the window grew into a thin, hazy layer while the wind howled so fiercely that the entire cottage trembled with each blast. After tightening the door's bolts, Elias pushed a wooden chair up against it to prevent the wind from tearing it open. Even though the fireplace was blazing brightly, the cold continued to seep in through all of the wall cracks. Nana's huge frame trembled slightly as she sat against the wall, her wounds still not completely healed. Elias added more wood to the fire, then covered her with their thickest blanket. Make an effort to stay warm, he added. A storm like this might last until morning. Na stared at him for a long time, her suspicious gaze gone. Elias, however, sat down on the chair by the fire and rubbed his hands together for warmth, as if weighing something in her head. This spot, she said, touching the blanket, is still cold. Just get through this evening. By tomorrow, the weather ought to improve. Nana continued to stare at him. Normally as stiff as a granite wall, her face had relaxed, displaying symptoms of fatigue and something else. She attempted to conceal a hint of trepidation. She moved a little and opened the blanket more. Her tone was harsh and low. However, each syllable was clear as it hit the freezing air. This place has space. Lying close together will keep two individuals warmer. Elias stopped. He was aware that she was correct. Sharing body heat with fellow soldiers was how he had survived numerous nights in the trenches during the war. However, this was not a combat zone. He was simply a lone rancher, and she was a huge Apache woman. You sure? Elias inquired. Nana remained silent. She merely gave the blanket a gentle tug, an invitation, calm and firm, but with an evident sense of optimism that was reminiscent of the best Wild West love stories. Elias approached her and lay down next to her. Warmth spread swiftly as soon as their bodies came into contact. Nana's skin had a subtle smell of wild grass and wood smoke, and her body was warmer than he had anticipated. A peculiar sense of security descended upon the tiny home. A few minutes went by in silence. Na then turned to look at Elias, the firelight shining in her deep black eyes. She extended her arm and lightly caressed his cheek. I have faith in you. Elias put his hand behind her neck at that precise time, drawing her in till their lips connected in a deep, gentle kiss that was powerful enough to melt all the ice she had ever formed around her heart. Their breaths blended together like two trails of warm smoke as they withdrew. You're safe here always, Elias muttered. Nana dropped all of her defenses and put her head on his shoulder for the first time. Finally, winter relaxed its hold. Under the morning sun, the first areas of snowmelt slid down the mountain slopes, exposing damp brown dirt and quivering early grass blades. After being covered in white for several weeks, Elias's cabin appeared to come back to life. Elias welcomed the first warmth of spring by opening the door earlier than usual. However, this morning, Na was waiting on the porch with her wide shoulders almost filling the doorway before he could go outside. She was staring down at her hands when she carefully covered her belly with one big palm. It was a simple gesture, yet it was enough to stop Elias cold. His voice softened involuntarily as he said, Are you all right? Na turned to face him, her eyes calmer and deeper than they had been in those early days. She grabbed Elias's hand and covered her stomach with it. He had a scorching hand. There was an odd, brilliant glow in her tummy. There is a child, Na said softly. Elias stayed motionless for a few moments, as though every syllable were a pledge. All of his thoughts, including those he had not dared to consider, came flooding in at once. Ultimately, though, all that came out of his mouth was a smile. A rare smile on that worn face. Elias squeezed her hand gently and murmured, Well then. After giving him a long look, Nania said, We'll need more room, and I'll build a cradle, a strong one. Elias longed for her to retract her remarks. However, she then put her palm over his chest, just where his heart was thumping violently. She admitted, I used to look down on you. I believed you were unworthy of my warrior blood because you were little and feeble. Elias let out a small breath. Yes, I assumed. Na, however, shook her head. I get it now. True strength is not fleeing, not being afraid of me, and never making a request. Elias chuckled quietly and roughly. I love you, that's why. Na's expression softened for the first time. She spoke softly, as if expressing something bigger than any conflict. She was no longer a warrior, no longer a wounded lone rancher giant, but a woman standing at the start of her own spring. And you are my choice. The old curtain was softly rustled when the spring wind blew through the wide open door. Then let's get started, Elias murmured, squeezing her hand once more. To build a house, we have a lot of work ahead of us. Across the grassland, news spread more quickly than the wind. Elias Hawkins, a rancher, marries a massive Apache woman. The entire village of Red Valley rushed to the small church on the hill, where Pastor Jacob typically performed weddings for elderly white couples, after hearing just one sentence. The sun was just bright enough to shine on the traditional outfit Na had picked out for herself that day, lined with shimmering Apache beads that matched the contours of her strong, towering body. The throng became silent as soon as she got off the wagon. Some others moved back in terror, while others dropped their jaws. "I have never seen a woman that tall," some whispered. However, Elias stood next to Na like a mountain watching over a calm stream when Na approached. Nobody was afraid anymore. Instead, they witnessed something peculiar and incredibly lovely. Fate had brought the two souls together like a cruel winter prank. When Pastor Jacob opened the Bible, his hands shook. He looked up at Nas, who was almost tall enough to touch the chapel ceiling, before lowering his gaze to Elias, who had a hand that was nearly twice as big as his own. "My son," he murmured. "Are you certain?" Elias didn't think twice. With his gaze fixed on Na, he gripped her hand. "She prevented me from being alone. I have decided to love her for the rest of my life, so I'm just doing my share right now." The room erupted in shock rather than laughing or derision. Nobody had anticipated that a man as direct as Elias would say something so unadulterated. Na's turn came next. Her shadow moved across the wooden steps as she took a step forward. With the authority of a warrior, her voice was firm and deep. "That I picked this man because his heart never wavered, not because he is stronger than I am." She put her palm over her stomach and said, "My child will choose him too because I have end and go in 2-3 and go in 2-3 and go in dollars. I'll simply finish and keep going in cash." Nobody took a breath. The weight of that moment engulfed every sound in the chapel. "I now declare you husband and wife in the name of the Lord," Pastor Jacob said, clearing his throat. Cheers. Applause. Outside, horses are neighing in a joyous, boisterous celebration that Red Valley seldom witnessed. All of the lone ranchers came together. Elias bent over. Under the old chapel ceiling, which had never witnessed a love tale quite like this one, Nana leaned down even more and they shared a kiss. Hunter Creek Valley felt different that spring. Not because the streams were thawing or the trees were blooming, but rather because Elias Hawkins's small cabin was now filled with laughter, and the rancher, who had lived alone for years, felt the warmth of something he had never experienced there before. A household. Elias was hammering wooden planks for the new room while standing in the garden. Like the man himself, the hammer's rhythm was solid and sincere. Nana was gathering dry grass not far from him, and every now and again her hands would inadvertently stray to her tummy, where a tiny life was silently developing every day. Every time she passed through Red Valley, she had become accustomed to people pausing to stare. An Apache woman with muscles sculpted like mountain stone, standing over 7 feet tall at 2 meters and 13 centimeters. However, no one anticipated the gentleness of her eyes. She never had to defend herself. As tracks pressed into the soft earth, her decision was already evident. "You ought to take a short break." Elias put down the wood and remarked, "Winds are picking up." Nana answered, "I'm fine," but she delayed long enough for him to come see whether she was feeling chilly. His little but powerful hand was resting on her shoulder. Elias stated, "Not fine by me means not fine at all." Nana chuckled softly. Once uncommon. On the porch of that cabin, her laughing had become a familiar sound. "When did you start acting so obstinately?" Elias mocked. "Probably around the time I married a woman who could lift me with one hand." Nana chuckled once again, then leaned forward to give him a forehead kiss. Even though she didn't talk much, a warrior like her never displayed tenderness to the outer world in any of her gestures. It grew dark. Across the hills, golden sunshine poured like honey. Nana went out onto the veranda and surveyed the expansive valley that she had previously fled, almost completely engulfed by a harsh winter. The breeze was now softly blowing across her hair. Elias approached her from behind, encircled her waist with his arms. He said, "What are you looking at?" Na remained still. She just continued to gaze up at the sky, as though she could see her whole life taking shape in the distance. Like stone and soil, her voice was steady and low. It feels closer here, Elias asked quietly. Nearer to what? Na put her powerful hand over his and gently squeezed it. Nearer to you. Closer to tranquilly. Nearer to home. Firelight illuminated the small cabin at the base of the hill. Like a signal, smoke coiled into the air and rose into the spring wind. A man used to be a lonely rancher. A gigantic Apache once pursued and intimidated a woman. They had stopped running. They had established a peaceful space for themselves, where winter was unable to prevail, where the bonds of the past were broken, where a youngster was developing within Nania. One day at a time, a new future was being written. Love is not a magnificent, radiant wonder. It is the silent perseverance of two people who have the courage to confront their own worries. It provides us with a place to stand when the storm arrives, but it does not provide shelter from the storm. The ideal person is not sought after by true love. It selects the one who observes us as wild, bruised, and scarred and continues to be there. Love becomes the only thing that matters in these untamed locations where individuals frequently lose themselves. Small, uncomplicated, but constantly guiding us home. Having you here is a privilege. I sincerely hope you always stay happy and secure. My darling Wild West storytelling audience, you have my undying love. Please share your thoughts about this topic in the comments section below. If you liked it, type 1.